All right. So hello and welcome to my graduate lecture recital. Thank you. So the work that I chose to do this lecture on is the 6 Balkan Miniatures for World Peace by Dusan Bogdanovic. I chose these miniatures because of their uniqueness, and when I first began studying them, I had very little understanding of how they should be played. By researching this work, I learned a little bit about a very great musical tradition that has almost no presence in the American music scene. I learned about the history of the Balkan countries and their culture, which I am very grateful for. This musical tradition has a lot to offer, and understanding it can enhance the performance and listening experience of these miniatures. Dusan Bogdanovic was born in 1955 in the country formerly known as Yugoslavia, modern-day Serbia. He studied composition and orchestration at the Geneva Conservatory in Switzerland, where he studied with Pierre Wismar and Alberto Ginastera. He's also an accomplished performer, having won the only awarded first prize at the 1975 Geneva competition, as well as making his Carnegie Hall debut in 1977. His compositional style is a synthesis of classical, jazz, and folk music, with the folk music extended towards many cultures across the world, not just his native Balkan territory. He is taught at the Belgrade Academy in Serbia, the San Francisco Conservatory, and is currently teaching at his alma mater, the Geneva Conservatory. The Balkan Miniatures for World Peace were published in 1993 in response to the great turmoil in the region. War had erupted around his homeland, which resulted in an estimated 130,000 deaths, as well as 2 million international refugees and 2.4 million internally displaced people. These conflicts were caused by the rising tensions between ethnic, religious, and political groups. In the foreword to these miniatures publication, Bogdanovic writes, "These days of political turmoil in Eastern Europe find their focus especially in Yugoslavia, the heart of the Balkans and my homeland. It is both tragic and ironic to see the further disintegration of the land and the people, while being aware of the unique cultural stamp of the whole area. So it might be that the art, among other universal human endeavors, still shows us a way of harmonizing and synthesizing the most diverse elements coming from the same source. It is in this spirit that I dedicate this music to world peace." So this region of the world has been at the heart of many conflicts over the centuries. And to better understand the context of these miniatures, it would be helpful to have a brief overview of the region's history. Culturally speaking, the Balkan states have incredible diversity. The diversity stems from many distinct ethnic groups of the regions, including Serbs, Croats, Bosniaks, Slovenes, Romani, Hungarian, really too many to list here. These ethnic groups have maintained a certain degree of separation from one another, but have interacted and influenced the general culture of the region over time. The region has been caught between warring empires, religious conquest, and political tinkering for much of recorded history, and these events have left their mark on the land and the people. Various empires have laid claims to these lands. They've been held under Roman and Byzantine rule, Ottoman, even Austrian Habsburg rule. Each governing force affected the people in the region, injecting their culture and influence and religion. This affected the music as well, and the uniqueness of Balkan music is evidence of all the different cultural influences. I have a series of maps that show the borders of the Balkans over a period of time. All of this was once part of the Byzantine Empire, which fell to the Ottoman Empire by the 15th century. This first map on the left shows the conflict between the Ottomans and the Habsburg Empire in the mid-16th century. You can see the territories that were operating as Ottoman vassal states, as well as the Hungarian land that was acquired by the Ottomans. Let's see, these are the vassal states here, and this was the territory acquired by the Ottomans here. The northwestern border of the Ottoman Empire is shown here, and part of it still exists today as the border between Slovenia and Croatia. The next map shows the border as the Habsburgs gained control of the Croatia-Slavonia region in the 17th and 18th centuries. The 18th century border still stands today as the border between Croatia and Bosnia and Herzegovina. That is here. and the territory here under Venetian control is also a part of that border. This map, showing the borders during the 1880s, shows the growing complexity of the border situation in the midst of the territory conflict, as some states acquired autonomy from the larger empires. The two world wars, which quite literally tore much of the world apart, further complicated the region. The events of the First World War led to the creation of the Kingdom of Yugoslavia, which was subsequently invaded by Axis powers in World War II. This map shows the country as it was after World War II under a communist government. You can see that many of the previously autonomous countries are grouped as one here. And finally, we have a map showing the Balkan states as they are today. Borders have fluctuated, governments have changed, religions have been pushed in and out. As the previous maps have shown, major events have shaped these territories and created borders that might have been drawn differently if left up to the people living in the region. The borders that have been established over time were not able to fully represent the multitude of different cultural identities. Because of this, identity became a greater issue for many people in the Balkans. Divisions were created or maintained between ethnic groups. Catholic, Orthodox, Jewish, and Muslim religions were the subject of further division even within ethnic groups. Yugoslavia attempted to politically unify a diverse group of people under a central government. And one could argue that unity is a good thing, but the Yugoslav government was primarily Serb-centric. This graphic shows the timeline of every regional secession from Yugoslavia in the early 90s. Nationalism was on the rise in the region, and there was growing resentment toward governments that suppressed certain ethnic groups or religions. Minority groups within different countries began seeking autonomy or secession. The governments did not want to give up control, and tensions between the governments and resistance groups led to the eruption of war. So these are the circumstances in which Dusan Bogdanovic felt inspired to write these Balkan miniatures for world peace. Like many musicians, Bogdanovic feels that music is a universal human endeavor. These miniatures draw from cultural sources from across the Balkan region, providing a symbolic gesture of unity. I will now give a brief overview of the elements of Balkan music. Of course, this is a broad generalization, as there are differences of a single genre or dance from town to town. Tonally speaking, Balkan music is quite different from other European or Western music. A modal system is used, however, it is different from the more familiar Greek modes. The modal system used here is called makam, and it was developed over the years through Byzantine, Ottoman, and other cultural influences. Each makam is made up of either 4 or 5 pitches, and each contain different intervallic relations between the notes. The makams can be stacked to reach a full octave or exchanged in modal mixture. This diagram includes quarter tone intervals, which are especially present in Turkish music. Fregesh is a term used to describe the augmented second interval that is so characteristic of Balkan music. The meter of Balkan music is perhaps the most recognizable aspect. Described by musicologists as aksak, which means limping in Turkish, these rhythmic cells can feel chaotic or uneven to an outsider's ear. This graphic shows the different possibilities for arranging beats in an 11/16 time. The insertion of a long beat between shorter beats is an overarching feature found in all of these aksak meters. The larger beats are emphasized, as shown on the right, and different dances will have a different arrangement of long and short beats. I'll demonstrate these for you here. First one. Second one. Third one. Fourth one. Most rhythmic cells are based off of prime numbers, with 5, 7, 11, and 13 groupings being the most common. In these 6 miniatures, Bogdanovic uses these elements in conjunction with his own compositional style. The maqams are used and mixed, sometimes simultaneously. He composes many of the miniatures contrapuntally and allows the separate voices to use different maqam. The music is primarily linear, the harmony being a byproduct of the linear motion of the different voices. Many aspects of this music operate outside the typical tonal rules of Western music, which is a result of the traditional Balkan style as well as Bogdanovich's compositional style. Finally, as will be shown, Bogdanovich uses thematic and harmonic elements throughout the miniatures to tie them together. So, well, that's handy.
You should be able to go to File and Recent. Hold on.
No, I'm just going to do this. Okay. So here's an overview showing the tonal areas, meter, form, and style. The tonal relationships can be seen here, especially between the miniatures that have been asterisked. That's 1, 4, and 6. These are the miniatures that share the most similarities with theme and harmony. And of course, these tonal areas are not exactly in major or minor, but for the understanding of the tonal relations, those labels are used. The first and last miniatures use the same meter and are similar to a traditional Bulgarian dance called the kopanica. The third miniature, in 7/8, is a rendition of a traditional Serbian dance. The fourth closely resembles another Bulgarian dance called the pajuska. The two contrasting miniatures, 2 and 5, are not dances. 2 is a lament and composed in a song-like manner with accompaniment, and 5 is a free-form improvisational piece. So to go more in depth, we'll look at each miniature individually. Jutarnje kolo, or morning dance, is a moderately fast-paced dance. As stated before, it's in binary form, and the A section is shown here. The first beat requires a sostenuto, creating a lean from the G sharp to the A. The rest of the phrase follows in time with a reoccurring short, short, long, short, short pattern. And this that I've highlighted is the motif that we'll see used throughout the miniatures. I'll demonstrate the motif as well as the lean of that G sharp to the A. And that theme will come up later in different forms. I'll demonstrate the other, or a simplified version. So the texture here is in only 2 voices, and you can see how they're moving independently of one another. The linear motion of the voice and its direction are the deciding factors as to what accidentals or maqam are used. In the second measure, Bogdanovich uses an E flat to return to the D in the melody, but keeps the E natural in the bass line unchanged. That's here and here. This is a clear example of how these modes can be mixed. This is seen throughout the miniatures, but is most evident here. Moving forward, the miniature transitions away from D and centers around a B tonality. Measure 5 introduces the second theme, which is really just the transposition of the original motif, as they share the same melodic motion with slightly different ornamentation. Here's the first one, and second one. The A section ends with a relatively strong cadence on a B minor chord, or implied B minor chord. The B section begins back in a D tonality, and this time the motif is transposed a minor third higher. The same sostenuto is placed here, emphasizing the lean of the B natural. You can see how Bogdanovich is using the motif, transposing it to different pitch classes with the different harmonies underneath. The second theme returns again, and this time ends with a transposition up an octave with further embellishment. The miniature ends in a B tonality with an implied B minor harmony. And to a Western listener, this might sound odd, but as you will see in some of the later miniatures, a return to one or tonic is not always necessary. This miniature shows the creativity of Bogdanovich as he takes an idea that is essentially in constant repetition and elaborates on it through transposition, modal change, and ornamentation. Jalapolka, which means lament, is one of the two miniatures that is not a dance. It is very close to a conventional A minor tonality, but employs heavy chromaticism throughout. Bogdanovich maintains three voices consistently in this miniature, and in each voice you can see the overall falling motion that is so characteristic of the lament genre. The melody consists of a motif that moves down a third, similar to the recurring motif, and is repeated and transposed, but does not stray away from the A minor scale. The use of chromaticism in the lower voices creates harmonies that would not normally exist anywhere near A minor, and helps drive the phrases forward. Even as the full idea is completed at the end of the first half, there is not a very strong feeling of completeness. In the second half, the entire idea is repeated with slight variation. Here you can clearly see the movement of each line moving down an octave from their respective starting pitches. So you have the A in the soprano, little repetition there, and then finally A. In the bass voice, we'll do this first. Bass voice, little repetition, and then alto voice. Repetition. Sorry. Now, I saved this one for last. There is an alternate ending here. And as it is written here, it ends with just the bass and soprano voices. But with the other ending, I'll demonstrate that. There's a full return from the bass E to the low E. Now in the alto voice, there's an interesting thing where the F natural goes all the way down to an F sharp. Now this is almost like a Picardy third, but that is only present in the alternate ending. Vranyanka is the only dance from this set that is a literal adaptation of a traditional dance. Translated, it means a woman from the town of Vranje, Vranje being a town in Serbia. It is the most rhythmically challenging miniature to play, as certain beats are stretched out within the asymmetrical 7/8 meter. According to Bogdanovich, this is a typical way of playing this particular dance. Tonally, this piece is centered around D, resembling a minor scale with a raised fourth. It begins with a brief introduction, and the dance begins using the same material. The ending of the phrase on a C-sharp minor chord is jarring but effective, and the movement of D to E as a resolution is consistently used throughout the miniature. When you hear the melodic motion by itself, it actually does sound like a complete idea, and I'll demonstrate that along with the stretch of the fermatas at the end of every measure. After the repetition, contrasting material is introduced. It is a bit harmonically vague and syncopates in a way that isn't used anywhere else in the miniature, which provides some nice variation. That leads back into the original material, which is varied upon with ornamentation. Functionally, this B section could be considered developmental. Notice the D to E movement that was previously mentioned is now in the bass voice, but still maintains a similar function. This section is repeated, which leads to the second ending and final section of the miniature. This is essentially a reiteration of the first section and ends with strong conviction on that C sharp minor chord. Makedonsko Kolo, or Macedonian dance, uses the motif that was present in the first miniature. It's a looser adaptation, but with the movement through A, G sharp, and F sharp is carried in the melody. First theme. And here it is. Okay. The tonal areas are also related, as will be shown. The miniature begins with a quick introduction, and the melody actually begins on the second beat, which creates a distinctive rhythmic emphasis for the dance. This also is the first miniature in which both the melody and the harmony seem to be working back to the tonal center at the end of the phrase. The first episode is roughly centered around B, like the first miniature, and mirrors the register and movement. Mirrors the register and movement of the second theme from the first miniature. After a cadence on B, a segmented refrain returns and leads to the second episode. This episode is mixed with A and E tonality, which is not present in the first miniature. The material used here is new and builds tension by adding voices, changing register, and increasing volume. The final refrain is a standard reiteration and ends just as it did in the beginning. Shiroko is the other miniature that is not a dance. The name in English is Wide Song, and is meant to emulate the type of free-form improvisations found in the Balkans. This miniature has no time signature, and the performer is expected to make free use of rubato, as well as observe the many fermatas. It is roughly centered around E, and makes use of the B and E strings as a drone. This drone remains constant right up to the end of the miniature, and mimics the style of oud-like instruments from the region, like the baglama or kura. The miniature gives the impression that an idea is being developed in real time. There is an introduction, which establishes E. Find my mouse there. And then the bass line carries a melody, moving stepwise over top of the drone. The idea begins again, this time moving slightly differently, elaborating on the previous passage. The melody then climbs higher, increasing in intensity through speed and volume for the climax of the miniature. The intensity slowly recedes, and the melody moves back down, but not back to E. Bogdanovich chooses to end the miniature with an F major 7 chord, which does not seem to work as a conclusion, or which does seem to work as an conclusion, aided by the ritardando and the intention of each note. It leaves with an open-ended feeling, which leads into the final miniature. Sitni vez means tiny knit dance, which is an allusion to the fast-moving fingers of the accordion or flute players who would play such dances. This miniature uses the reoccurring motif from miniatures 1 and 4. It is in 11/16 time, like the first dance, but does include some meter change for variation. It also shares similar tonal relations, starting in D. Its form is ternary. The introduction teases the main motif and leads directly into the first phrase. The melody is a direct quote of the original motif as it was used in the first miniature. Here we have some new material, still in the tonal center of D. The melody is accompanied by a strum drone, emphasizing the pulse of the dance and thickening the texture. The middle section begins here, the B section, and the B tonality briefly returns. This uses new material from the previous section, with syncopation in the accompaniment that varies the pulse of the dance even further. Here, Bogdanovich switches the meter around with every measure, adding variation to the rhythmic flow and subverting expectation. After a repetition, a new phrase begins centered in E. At this point, a pattern can be observed between the miniatures that share the motif. The first miniature started in D and moved back to B. Go to here. The fourth miniature started in D, moved to B, and introduced E and A. This last miniature starts in D, moves to B, directly to E, and then A at the end of the B section. So what becomes clear is, well, let me go back. What's become clear in the final miniature is the relation of all these tonal centers, B being the dominant of E, E being the dominant of A, and A, of course, leading back to D at the end. This pattern slowly unfolds over the course of the miniatures and is tied together at this last miniature. So the final section of the miniature is back in D and uses the same motif. It begins slowly, but increases steadily in speed all the way to the end. The intensity and the rate of which the player strums is increased for a final climactic triple forte wall of sound. These miniatures represent and reflect the diversity of culture in the Balkan people. I think as outsiders, it can be easy to generalize the music of a region or lump traditions together into a uniform system. The music found around the Balkan region is diverse, just like the people. But by looking a little deeper, we see that Bogdanovich is purposefully bringing together these traditions to symbolize the shared cultural heritage of the Balkan people. So, without further ado, I will play the 6 Balkan miniatures for world peace. Sure, let me go back.
Doing exactly written in the 16th notes and then doing it again with the 8th notes.
Well, let me go. Oop. Here, so this is basically what is the first movement. That top one that's circled, that is the rhythm of the first and last movement. So it's grouped in 2, 2, 3, 2, 2, or.
Good. Could you do it in the 16th notes and then do it in the 8th notes so it's super clear?
Yeah, let me see if I can do the accents too. Does that make sense?
And yes, and then how did that reduce?
What's that?
Reduce that to 8th notes? Great. That's much clearer.
Okay.
Great. I'm understanding that more.
Yeah, the same goes with the rest of them. Do you want me to demonstrate the other ones like that as well?
I think that'd be really, really instructive.
Sure. Next one. And last one.
Very helpful. Also, you mentioned that what is probably a really important thing, the phrasing.
Yes.
Yeah, I would love to. Could you show us one phrasing and where it appears in the piece and play for us so we can really hear that? It seems like it's a really important part of the Vulcan music melodic landscape.
Yeah, so the Freygish is just the augmented second interval. Sorry, let me actually pull up an example.
Probably the last one would be the easiest one to find.
Well, actually, let me do this melody here. So. There.
That's what a phrasing sounds.
That augmented second, yeah, interval.
Also,
Bas-
in the main theme of the last movement.
Mm-hmm. Yep, right there too.
Great. Super important. Thank you. One of my questions.
Any other questions?
You know everything about Vulcan music now? Good job.
Thank you. Thanks everyone for coming.
Good job.